Man, the weather is just crazy around here. I tell you what, though, Carol's been gone, so I've been batching it. It's like, I don't know how I survived, but, I guess I'm going to make it okay. But Kirsten asked me to go Friday night to do something I have not done in many years. We went to the six-pack. Now, Marcia, you probably knows what the six-pack is. Who else? Does anyone else know what the six-pack is? Okay, it's not a beer joint. Okay, we didn't do that. The six-pack are basketball courts, 6 of them, out on the University of Illinois campus, just west of the Memorial Stadium. And we went out there Friday night. And the wind was blowing. It was dark. They had the sounds playing. And, man, we're sitting there watching all these young adults, guys and gals playing basketball and enjoying the evening and the moment and talking trash and hanging out. And Kirsten and I, we played some ball together and shot around and things like that. And it just brought back a lot of good memories of when I used to go out and do things just exactly like that. But I guess it was so encouraging to me, to see these young adults, man, the future, and just the fun they were having and being together. And spending that time with my daughter, just a wonderful evening. It's great to be here. Good to be here this morning. Brian, thank you, and Kirsten. Carol's away. And Brian drove all the way back from St. Louis last night. He had a show there to be here this morning to lead us in worship, to drive back to Springfield this afternoon to do a recording session, and to come home tonight and pass out. But he's here now, and we're here now to worship. And we're beginning our new series, Where Love Found Me. Where Love Found Me. And we're talking about making sense out of life. And we're beginning this series, Where Love Found Me, because this is our motto. This is our logo. This is the essence of who we are. And it's been in a process over the years of developing and coming about. And the very vibe and who we see ourselves as being is that each and every person who comes in contact with our community through our relationships, through just being with us, in some way, shape, or form, finds the love of Jesus, finds them. And we're not perfect, but we're passionate. And they call us the Church of the Open Arms. And we open our arms to every person who walks through our doors to welcome them, to greet them, to help them experience the love of Christ in each and every one of their lives. Because only the love of Jesus can transform and change people. Jesus' love that was visible on the cross. Jesus' love that was heard in his words, Father, forgive them, for they don't even know what they're doing. Jesus' love that is felt and found by every person who comes looking for the Jesus who is looking for them. The love of Christ, Jesus. And our human love points to, but is only imperfectly to the love of Jesus. We have a passionate love of youth, which shows the passionate love of Jesus, but only partially. We have the comforting love of marriage, which shows us the comforting love of Jesus, but not completely. And we have the love of a parent for a child and a child of a parent, which is very encouraging, but is not eternal. Only the love of Jesus can change a person's life and help them become the person, the man or woman that they have been created to be and God desires for them to be. More songs have been written about love than any other subject. And more poems have been written about love than any other subject matter that we have. We talk about, how do I love thee? Let me count the ways. And there's too many ways to be counted. And so our music comes off key. Our words are inadequate to describe the love of Jesus in our hearts and lives. And the reality of us is that we can only know love because Jesus gave his life to show us love. We can know love only because Jesus gave his life for us to show us love. And Jesus found two scared disciples on Easter afternoon. Now, this is not just any Easter afternoon. This is the first Easter afternoon. Jesus has been resurrected for the world, but the world did not yet know that Jesus had been resurrected. And these disciples are trying to understand what has taken place, but they could not make sense of what had happened, and life for them at that moment of time did not make sense. And we find this in the book of Luke chapter 24, verse 13. Now that same day, two of them were going to a village called Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem. And they were talking with each other about everything that had happened. And as they talked and discussed these things with each other, Jesus himself came up and walked along with them. But they were kept from recognizing him. And he asked them, "What are you discussing together as you walk along?" And they stood there, their faces downcast. And one of them, named Cleopas, asked him, "Are you only a visitor to Jerusalem and do not know the things that have happened here in these days?" "What things?" he asked. "About Jesus of Nazareth," they replied. All right, Emmaus is about 7 miles from Jerusalem. And so that is a lot of walking. And it creates an enormous space to do a lot of talking. And apparently they had enough to talk about as they walked along, because it consumed their entire time as they were walking along, because life did not make sense for them, and they were trying to make sense out of their life at this moment of time of uncertainty and the unknown. And what is true for them is true for us, that we can live without many things, but we cannot live without making sense out of life. Right? We can live without many things, but we cannot live without making sense out of life. And life for these two disciples did not make sense. You know, in our lives are composed of all of our experiences that we have known to date. You know, our past experiences feed into our present experiences, and our future experiences are based upon our past experiences. And all these things decisions we've made, the things that we've experienced, places we've gone, all these things come together to form in each one of us what is called our worldview. And our worldview is our view of the world and how the world works or doesn't work. But then when something happens that is strange for us and that doesn't fit with our view of the world and how the world works, we spend an enormous amount of time trying to understand and saying things like, this just does not make sense. You ever say that about something? You have something going on. This just doesn't make sense. I say that it's about my laptop computer all the time. Man, I know what it's supposed to do. It's supposed to do what I tell it to do. But a lot of times, my laptop doesn't do what I tell it to do. It does something just the opposite. And I get frustrated. And I don't know what to do with it. I say, this just doesn't make sense. I say this about people who like cats. It just doesn't make sense to me that anyone would like a cat. How could someone like cats? It just doesn't fit in my worldview, my perspective. It just doesn't. Man, I can't wrap my mind around that. It just will not ever be part of my existence in my life. And children say that about their parents. Man, mom, dad, that just doesn't make sense. And maybe you said something about this in your life. Hey, this just does not make any sense. And that's these two men. Life is just not making sense for them. Something that has happened that as they walked and they talked, they could not wrap their minds around it, and it did not make sense to them. And maybe you've had stuff in your life that's happened to you that does not make sense to you. Something tragic. Maybe something physical. Something really hard. Or maybe it's something wonderful. Something that was more than you could have ever believed or hoped for, that was even possible, more than you deserved, you feel like, in your life. It just doesn't make sense. And so you spend your time trying to understand what it is that doesn't make sense. And for these two men, what had happened to them didn't make sense. So they tell Jesus all these things about himself that didn't make sense. And they tell Jesus, they say, he was a prophet, powerful in word and deed before God and all the people. The chief priests and our rulers handed him over to be sentenced to death, and they crucified him. But we had hoped that he was the one who was going to redeem Israel. And what is more, it is the third day since all this took place. In addition, some of our women amazed us. They went to the tomb early this morning, but did not find his body. They came and told us that they had seen a vision of angels who said he was alive. Then some of our companions went to the tomb and found it just as the women had said, but him they did not see. All right, there's two things going on here. At first they say, Jesus was a prophet. Easter is all about Jesus, but they didn't fully understand and know this Jesus who was Easter is all about. They said he was a prophet. He understood people. He understood the times. He understood the future. He understood how things would fit together. And yes, Jesus was a prophet, but he was also a teacher. He was a rabbi. He was a scholar. He was a mentor. He was a good friend. He was all these things and so much more because he was the Son of the living God, and because they did not know him as the Son of the living God. They didn't know who he was or what he had come to do. And so what has happened here does not make sense to them because they didn't know who Jesus was. But beyond not knowing who Jesus was, those who were the most significant people in their lives were saying things and doing things that did not make sense either. See, the chief priests and our rulers handed him over to be sentenced to death, and they crucified him. Now, wait a minute. If he was the Messiah, the Son of God, then the chief priests and rulers should have worshipped him rather than crucifying him. And it didn't make sense. And some of our women, notice our women, part of our community, amazed us. They went to the tomb early this morning, but they did not find his body. All right, these women who they knew went to the tomb, did not find Jesus' body, and this did not make sense. And not only that, then some of our companions went to the tomb and found it just as the women had said, but they did not see him. This did not make sense. The rulers should have worshipped him. The women should have found his body in the tomb, and our companions should have found Jesus somewhere in this tomb. But none of this fit together. None of this could be understood. None of this made sense to them at all. And so they're trying to put it all together. And they tell Jesus everything about himself he already knew that made sense to him but did not make sense to them. And maybe when you've had these times in your life that did not make sense, it is okay to tell Jesus what doesn't make sense. It's okay to say, Jesus, I don't understand what's happening to me right now. I can't wrap my mind around it. I can't put it together. It just does not fit with what I see my life becoming and me and the person I see myself being. Jesus, it just doesn't make sense. Or Jesus, I see this happen in this other person's life. And it's okay to talk to Jesus about all these things that you have dealt with or are dealing with that don't make sense. Because Jesus came to give his life to help us make sense out of life. You see, we can't, there's many things we can live without, but we can't live without making sense out of life. And so Jesus comes to help us do that. So he says to them, he says to these two men, how foolish you are and how slow of heart to believe all that the prophets have spoken. Did not the Christ have to suffer these things and then enter his glory? And beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he explained to them what was said in all the scriptures concerning himself. And as they approached the village to which they were going, Jesus acted as if he were going farther. But they urged him strongly, stay with us, for it is nearly evening. The day is almost over. So he went in to stay with them. And when he was at the table with them, he took bread, gave thanks, broke it, and began to give it to them. Then, now hear these words, then their eyes were opened, and they recognized him, and he disappeared from their sight. Nothing made sense to them about Jesus of Nazareth until they had a personal encounter with Jesus of Nazareth. What they understood about him didn't make sense. What their companions told them about Jesus didn't make sense. Even what they'd read in the Bible before did not make sense. Nothing about what had transpired in their lives made sense until they had a personal experience, encounter with Jesus. And it's then their eyes were open and they recognized him. And his love found them. And they ask each other, were not our hearts burning within us? Our hearts burning within us. See, that's a hard thing. That's a love thing. Were not our hearts burning within us while he talked with us on the road and opened the scriptures to us? And they got up and returned at once to Jerusalem, where they found the 11 and those with them assembled together and saying, it is true, the Lord has risen and has appeared to Simon. Then the two told what had happened on the way and how Jesus was recognized by them when he broke the bread with them. Were not our hearts burning within us? The love of Jesus found them through a personal encounter experience with Jesus, and as then they recognized Jesus for who he was and what he had come to do. But it took that encounter with Jesus for everything to begin to make sense. Now, some of you know, and William and Lucy especially know, that I take great pride in my yard. Maybe too much so. I love people, you know, if you step on my grass, it feels like a 3-inch old school shag rug. Man, you can walk on that. Oh, it feels so good. Massage your feet and toes. It feels so wonderful and awesome. And I love people watch them walk by and see my yard and say, oh, look at those blades of grass. They're so green. It's so lush looking. Oh, and see them go by. Look at my yard. And so I really take great pride in that. But this last year, something happened that didn't make sense. Whole areas of my yard suddenly started to die. I mean, just dried up and died. And it didn't make any sense. I had done everything I was supposed to do to have a beautiful yard. I had watered it. I had sprayed it for weeds. I had fertilized it periodically throughout the year. I had done everything I was supposed to do to have this amazing yard, which I wanted and just so desperately had to have. But whole areas were dying, and I'm looking around, but one day I decided to walk out and grab some of the grass there and just pull on it. And I pulled up entire clumps of the grass. It didn't have any roots on it. And suddenly the light bulb came on and it began to make sense. Grubs had gotten to my yard and eaten the roots off my grass and killed it. I was heartbroken. You see, I had done everything right except one thing. I had forgotten and left out grub killing. And maybe that's you in your life. Maybe you've done everything right. You made the right decisions. You met the right people. You're following your 5-year plan, your 10-year life plan. You're doing all the right things. But life is just not making sense to you because you forgot the one thing. You've forgotten to include Jesus in your life. But maybe right now you want to invite Jesus into your life. So that your life can begin to make sense. Can you